The silk dress felt like a cage as Lillian Fairmont stepped down from the gilded carriage onto the dusty street of Florence, Arizona. Her heart pounding with equal parts terror and exhilaration at what she had just done. Behind her, 300 miles east in Santa Fe, her father was probably discovering the note she had left on her vanity table, the engagement ring to Senator Whitmore's son sitting beside it like an accusation. She had walked away from everything: the mansion with its 40 rooms, the servants who knew her preferences better than she knew herself, the social calendar that dictated every moment of her existence, and the loveless marriage her parents had arranged to secure their political ambitions. The October sun beat down mercilessly on Florence in 1883, turning the main street into a ribbon of gold and brown. Lillian had chosen this remote Arizona Territory town precisely because it was the last place anyone would think to look for her. She clutched her single carpetbag, having left behind the dozen trunks that usually accompanied her on trips. Inside were 2 plain dresses she had purchased secretly, a small amount of money she had saved from her allowance over the years, and her grandmother's journal, the only possession she truly valued. A man on horseback rode past, tipping his hat to her with a curious expression. Lillian realized she must look absurd in her traveling dress of emerald silk and matching hat with ostrich feathers. She had planned to change before arriving, but the stagecoach had made such good time that she had not had the opportunity. Now she stood on the boardwalk, conspicuously wealthy in a town where most people wore practical cotton and leather. The town itself was smaller than she had imagined, consisting of a single main street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to sag under the weight of the desert heat. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a small hotel, and what appeared to be a land office made up the core of Florence. Beyond the buildings, she could see the desert stretching endlessly toward purple mountains in the distance. The landscape was so different from the manicured gardens and tree-lined streets of Santa Fe that for a moment Lillian felt panic claw at her throat. What had she done? "You lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured. Lillian turned to find herself looking up at a man who embodied everything her father had taught her to avoid. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat that touched his collar. His clothes were worn but clean denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and a leather vest. A hat hung down his back by a cord around his neck, and his eyes were the most remarkable shade of blue she had ever seen, like the sky just before dusk. "I am not lost," Lillian said, lifting her chin with the imperious manner that had been trained into her since childhood. "I have arrived exactly where I intended to be." Those blue eyes swept over her expensive dress with what might have been amusement. "Florence is exactly where you intended to be. Is there something wrong with Florence?" She heard the defensiveness in her own voice and hated it. "No, madam. Just that most folks don't come here on purpose, especially not folks who look like they could buy the whole town twice over." He shifted his weight, and she noticed he had been carrying a saddle over one shoulder. He set it down gently on the boardwalk. "Name's Vincent Ford. I help run the Ford Ranch about 5 miles east of here." Lillian hesitated, then decided there was no point in giving a false name. She had not committed a crime, merely claimed her own life. "Lillian Fairmont." "Well, Miss Fairmont, I don't mean to pry, but that stagecoach is already heading out again, and I saw you get off without any travel companions. Do you have people meeting you here? I am quite capable of taking care of myself." Vincent's expression did not change, but she sensed skepticism radiating from him. "I'm sure you are, but Florence doesn't have much in the way of accommodations for ladies." The hotel is clean enough, but it's mostly occupied by miners and ranch hands passing through. Then I will take a room at this hotel. Lillian picked up her carpetbag and started walking toward the building with the faded sign reading Florence Hotel. She made it 3 steps before Vincent spoke again. Rent's paid by the week, and Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, will want to know how long you're staying and why. Lillian stopped. She had not considered how strange her arrival would appear to the local people, or how difficult it might be to simply blend into a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business. In Santa Fe, she had been surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people and still felt invisible. Here, she was the only thing worth looking at on the entire street. She turned back to Vincent, who was watching her with those unsettling blue eyes. "I am seeking employment," she said, the words coming out more desperately than she intended. "I have some education. I can read and write and do figures. Surely there is something in this town that requires those skills." Now Vincent did react, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Employment. Is there something amusing about that?" "No, madam, just surprising. Women with money usually don't need to work, and women without money usually already know how to do more than read and write." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Can you cook, sew, clean, handle livestock?" Lillian felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I have never had cause to do those things personally, but I am certain I could learn. Mrs. Henderson could use help at the hotel," Vincent said thoughtfully. "She's getting on in years and the work is hard. But I'll be honest with you, Miss Fairmont, she's going to ask questions. Everyone in Florence is going to ask questions. You show up in a dress that probably cost more than most folks here make in a year, with no luggage to speak of, no husband or family, claiming you need work. People are going to wonder. Let them wonder." Lillian heard the tremor in her voice and steadied it. "My past is my own concern. I am here to start fresh." Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Lillian had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through her bravado to the terrified woman beneath. But when he spoke, his voice was kind. "All right then. I'll walk you over and introduce you to Mrs. Henderson. She's got a good heart, and she doesn't pry more than necessary. I did not ask for your assistance." "No, you didn't, but I'm offering it anyway." He picked up his saddle again, slinging it over his shoulder with an ease that spoke of years of hard physical labor. "This way." Lillian wanted to refuse, to demonstrate that she was perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. But the truth was that she had no idea how to navigate this world she had thrown herself into. Pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. She followed Vincent along the boardwalk, acutely aware of the curious stares from other townspeople. The hotel lobby was small and dim after the brightness of the street. A woman with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by desert sun looked up from behind a wooden counter. Her sharp eyes took in Lillian's appearance with open surprise. "Mrs. Henderson," Vincent said, his tone respectful. "This is Miss Lillian Fairmont. She just arrived in Florence and is looking for work. I thought you could use some help around here, Mrs." Henderson's gaze moved between Vincent and Lillian, lingering on the expensive dress. "Work, you say?" "Yes, madam," Lillian said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I am a hard worker and a fast learner. I can offer you excellent references from—" She trailed off, realizing how foolish that sounded. She could hardly ask her father's friends to vouch for her character after abandoning her family. References. Mrs. Henderson's tone was dry. "And what kind of work have you done before, Miss Fairmont?" Lillian swallowed her pride. "None, madam, but I am educated and capable, and I am willing to do whatever is necessary." "You ever made a bed, scrubbed a floor, emptied a chamber pot?" "No, madam. Cooked a meal, hauled water, beat rugs. No, madam, Mrs. Henderson sighed, but Lillian thought she detected something softer behind the woman's stern exterior. And why would a lady who's never done a day's work in her life come to Florence, Arizona, looking for employment? Lillian met the older woman's gaze directly. Because I need to learn how to take care of myself. Because I want to know that I can survive by my own efforts. Because I gave up a life of comfort to find something real, and I am prepared to work for it. The silence that followed felt endless. Mrs. Henderson looked at Vincent, who gave a small shrug that seemed to convey both uncertainty and support. Finally, the older woman spoke. I'll give you a trial period of 1 week. You'll start by helping with the laundry, which is the hardest work and will show me quick enough if you're serious. In exchange, you'll get a small room, 3 meals a day, and $1 at the end of the week if I decide to keep you on. You'll work from dawn until the evening meal is cleared. Are those terms acceptable? $1 for a week's work. Lillian had spent more than that on a single hair ribbon without thinking twice. But she nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Yes, madam, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll be singing a different tune once you see what the work entails. Mrs. Henderson pulled a key from a drawer behind the counter. Come on, I'll show you to your room. You'll want to change out of that ridiculous dress before you start. As Lillian followed Mrs. Henderson up a narrow staircase, she glanced back to see Vincent still standing in the lobby, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute, then turned and walked out into the bright afternoon. The room Mrs. Henderson showed her was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small washstand. The single window looked out onto the alley behind the hotel, where laundry lines were strung between buildings. It was smaller than her closet back home. Lillian set down her carpetbag and sat on the bed, which creaked under her weight, and for the first time since leaving Santa Fe, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had walked away from wealth, from privilege, from security. Her father, William Fairmont, was one of the most powerful railroad magnates in the Southwest. Her mother moved in social circles that included governors and generals. The marriage they had arranged for her would have cemented their position in society and guaranteed Lillian a life of continued luxury. She would have wanted for nothing material, lived in a grand house, had servants and fine clothes and every comfort imaginable. She also would have lived with a man who looked at her like property, who had made it clear that he expected obedience and propriety above all else. She would have smiled at dinner parties and poured tea and produced airs, and died without ever knowing who she really was or what she was capable of. Her grandmother's words, written in the journal Lillian now pulled from her bag, had given her the courage to leave. I lived my whole life doing what was expected of me, and I died without ever knowing what it felt like to choose my own path. Do not make my mistake, dear Lillian. Find out what you are made of before the world tells you what you should be. Lillian changed into one of the plain cotton dresses she had purchased, struggling with the buttons that were positioned in the back, where a lady's maid would normally assist her. The fabric was rough against her skin, nothing like the silk and satin she was accustomed to, but there was something liberating about it too. She looked at herself in the small, cloudy mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. Mrs. Henderson returned and looked her over with approval. That's more sensible. Now come on, I'll show you the laundry room. We'll start with the basics, and you can work your way up to the rest. The next hours passed in a blur of physical labor unlike anything Lillian had ever experienced. The laundry room was a shed behind the hotel where a huge iron pot sat over a fire pit. Mrs. Henderson showed her how to boil the water, add the soap, and scrubbed the sheets and towels against a washboard until her hands were raw. Then came the rinsing, the wringing, and finally the hanging of wet, heavy fabric on the lines outside. By the time the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, Lillian's arms ached, her back hurt, and her hands were red and chapped. She smelled of lye soap and smoke, and her hair had escaped its pins to hang in damp strands around her face. She felt utterly exhausted and strangely alive. Mrs. Henderson surveyed the laundry hanging on the lines with a critical eye. "You'll get faster with practice. Come inside and get some supper." The hotel's small dining room was occupied by several men who looked up with interest when Lillian entered. She was suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, but Mrs. Henderson steered her to a small table in the corner and brought her a plate of beef stew and fresh bread. The food was simple but delicious, and Lillian realized she had never been so hungry in her life. She was halfway through her meal when the door opened and Vincent Ford walked in. He had cleaned up since she saw him earlier, his hair damp and his shirt fresh. He glanced around the room and his eyes found her in the corner. For a moment, she thought he might come over, but instead he took a seat at the counter and ordered his own meal. Lillian found herself watching him despite her better judgment. There was something about the way he moved, with unconscious grace and economy of motion, that fascinated her. He chatted easily with Mrs. Henderson and exchanged greetings with the other men in the room, clearly well-liked and respected. When he laughed at something someone said, the sound was warm and genuine, and Lillian felt a strange flutter in her chest. She forced her attention back to her food, reminding herself sternly that she had not left behind one life to immediately complicate her new one with romantic notions. She needed to focus on learning to take care of herself, on proving that she was capable of surviving on her own merits. There was no room in that plan for a cowboy with blue eyes and a kind smile. Still, she was aware of Vincent's presence throughout the rest of her meal, and when he finally stood to leave, tossing some coins on the counter and bidding Mrs. Henderson good night, Lillian could not help but watch him go. The days that followed established a brutal routine. Lillian rose before dawn to help Mrs. Henderson prepare breakfast for the hotel guests. Then came the endless cycle of cleaning rooms, changing linens, sweeping floors, and tackling whatever other task needed doing. The laundry was a constant burden, with new sheets and towels soiling as fast as the old ones were cleaned. Lillian's hands became rough and calloused, her nails broken, her skin darkened by the sun despite her efforts to protect it. But she also grew stronger. The work that had left her trembling with exhaustion on the first day became gradually more manageable. She learned to carry buckets of water without sloshing, to make a bed with hospital corners, to build a fire and regulate its heat for cooking. Mrs. Henderson was a patient teacher, showing her the tricks and techniques that made the work easier, and Lillian discovered that she liked learning practical skills. Vincent Ford came to the hotel most evenings for supper, and Lillian gradually learned about him through snippets of conversation she overheard. He ran a cattle ranch with his father, though his mother had passed away several years earlier. He was 26 years old, unmarried, and known for his skill with horses. He had a reputation for fairness and honesty, qualities that meant something in a harsh land where a man's word had to be his bond. He never approached Lillian directly, but she often felt his eyes on her, watching as she served meals or cleaned tables. It made her self-conscious in a way that was different from the scrutiny she had endured in Santa Fe society. There, people had evaluated her worth based on her family name, her dowry, her potential as a social asset. Vincent's gaze felt more personal, as if he were trying to understand who she really was. It was nearly 2 weeks after her arrival in Florence when they finally spoke again. Lillian had finished the evening cleaning and stepped outside to breathe in the cool night air, her body aching from the day's work. The street was quiet, most of the town already asleep. She leaned against the porch railing and looked up at the stars, which seemed impossibly bright and close in the desert darkness. "You are still here." Lillian started, then realized Vincent was sitting on a bench at the far end of the porch, nearly invisible in the shadows. "You frightened me." "Sorry, didn't mean to." He stood and walked closer, and she could see him better in the light spilling from the hotel windows. "I'm a little surprised, to be honest. Figured you'd have gone back east by now." "Why would I do that?" he shrugged. "This isn't an easy life, and you weren't raised for it. No shame in admitting it's not what you expected." Lillian felt a flash of irritation. "You think I lack the fortitude to see this through?" "I think you've got more grit than I initially gave you credit for," Vincent said mildly. "Mrs. Henderson says you're one of the hardest workers she's ever had. Says you don't complain, even when the work is backbreaking." The unexpected praise caught Lillian off guard. "I am simply doing what needs to be done." "It's more than that. You're learning skills that take most folks years to develop, and you're doing it in weeks. That takes determination." He paused, then asked gently, "What are you running from, Lillian?" The use of her first name was presumptuous, but somehow it did not bother her. "Who says I am running from anything?" "Experience. People don't usually give up everything unless they're running from something or towards something. Since you don't seem to know where you're going, I'm guessing it's the former." Lillian considered how much to tell him. The safe choice would be to deflect, to maintain the mystery and privacy she had fought to establish. But there was something about the quiet night and Vincent's steady presence that made her want to be honest. "I was engaged to be married," she said finally. "To a man my parents chose for me. A man who saw me as a means to an end, not as a person. I had never made a real choice in my life. Everything was decided for me, from what I wore to what I ate to whom I would spend my life with. I wanted to know what it felt like to choose my own path, even if that meant giving up everything I had known." Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "That took courage, or foolishness. I am not yet certain which. They're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes the bravest things we do are also the most foolish." He smiled, and even in the dim light she could see the warmth in it. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. A life lived for other people's expectations isn't really a life at all." "Have you ever done something everyone told you was a mistake?" Lillian asked. "I stayed in Florence," Vincent said. "Had opportunities to go east, work for big cattle companies or railroads. Could have made more money, lived in a city, but I like it here. I like the open spaces, the honesty of the work, knowing everyone in town. My father thought I was crazy for turning down those opportunities, but I have never regretted it." "Your father runs the ranch with you." "More the other way around these days. He's getting older and the work is hard. We have a couple of ranch hands who help out, but most of it falls to me." Vincent leaned against the railing beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You should come see it sometime. The ranch, I mean. It is beautiful country, especially at sunrise." Lillian's heart quickened. "I do not know that would be proper. Bring Mrs. Henderson along if you're worried about propriety. She could use a day away from this place, and she likes you." He glanced at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I'd like to show you what I'm working toward, what keeps me here. I think you'd understand it." Before Lillian could respond, the hotel door opened and Mrs. Henderson stepped out. "There you are, Lillian. I was wondering where you'd got to." "Oh, hello, Vincent." "Evening, Mrs. Henderson. I was just inviting you and Miss Fairmont to come out to the ranch this Sunday if you're free. Thought you might enjoy seeing the place. Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes moved between them, and Lillian was certain the older woman could read the undercurrent of attraction that was growing impossible to ignore. But when she spoke, her tone was casual. That sounds lovely. Lillian has been working herself to the bone. She could use a day of rest. We'll come by after church if that suits. Perfect. I will have my father's good wagon ready. Vincent tipped his hat to both of them. Good night, ladies. As he walked away into the darkness, Mrs. Henderson turned to Lillian with a knowing smile. He is a good man, that Vincent Ford. Honest, hard-working, kind to his father. A woman could do worse. I am not looking for a man, Lillian said firmly. I came here to find my independence, not exchange one form of dependence for another. Those things aren't mutually exclusive either, Mrs. Henderson said, echoing Vincent's earlier words. But that is something you will have to figure out for yourself. Come on, let's get you to bed. Tomorrow we'll come early. Lillian lay awake that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert outside her window and thinking about Vincent Ford. She had sworn off marriage, off the complications of romantic entanglement. But there was something different about Vincent, something that called to a part of her she was only just discovering existed. He did not want to possess her or mold her into something she was not. He seemed content to simply know her, to understand her, and there was a freedom in that she had never experienced before. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Lillian attended the small church service in Florence, sitting beside Mrs. Henderson and feeling the eyes of the townspeople on her. She had learned that her mysterious arrival had been the subject of much speculation, with theories ranging from the ridiculous to the scandalous. But she had kept her head high and her story simple, and gradually people had accepted her presence if not her history. After the service, Vincent was waiting outside with a sturdy wagon pulled by two handsome horses. He helped both women up onto the seat with easy courtesy, then climbed up beside them and took the reins. The ride to the Ford ranch took them east out of town, following a rough track through desert landscape dotted with saguaro cactus and mesquite. The October air was pleasant, warm but not oppressively hot, and Lillian found herself relaxing as they left Florence behind. Vincent pointed out landmarks and told stories about the area, his love for the land evident in every word. The ranch itself was a revelation. The main house was a low, adobe structure with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides, offering shade and protection from the elements. Corrals and outbuildings spread out behind it, and beyond that, Lillian could see cattle grazing on land that stretched to the horizon. It was not grand or impressive in the way her father's mansion had been, but there was something solid and real about it that appealed to her. Vincent's father, Thomas Ford, came out to greet them. He was an older version of his son, with the same blue eyes and weathered face. His welcome was warm, and within minutes Mrs. Henderson was sitting with him on the porch, catching up on town gossip while Vincent showed Lillian around the property. They walked to the corrals where several horses watched them with curious eyes. Vincent climbed the fence and called to a beautiful bay mare who trotted over immediately, pushing her nose into his hand. "This is Copper," he said, stroking the mare's neck. "I raised her from a foal. She is the smartest horse I have ever worked with." Lillian reached out tentatively to touch the horse's soft muzzle. Copper snuffled at her palm, warm breath tickling her skin. "She is beautiful. Do you ride?" "I took lessons as a girl, but it was always side saddle in a park with a groom following along. Nothing like what you do here." Vincent considered this, then asked, "Would you like to learn? Real riding, I mean. It would give you more freedom to explore the area." "I would like that very much." Over the next hour, Vincent taught her the basics of mounting and sitting a horse properly. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for her mistakes. When she finally managed to ride Copper around the corral without his assistance, staying balanced and in control, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. "You are a natural," Vincent said, grinning up at her. "A few more lessons and you will be ready to ride out on the range." Lillian dismounted with his help, her legs shaky but her heart soaring. "Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for being willing to learn." Vincent's hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Lillian felt heat that had nothing to do with the sun spreading through her body. His eyes met hers, and she saw her own confused attraction reflected there. They were standing very close, and Lillian became acutely aware of the solid warmth of him. The way his shirt was open at the collar revealing sun-bronzed skin, the faint smell of leather and soap, and something uniquely him. Her breath caught, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But Vincent stepped back, releasing her, his expression suddenly guarded. "We should get back to the house. My father will have lunch ready." The meal was simple but delicious: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the ranch garden. Thomas Ford was an excellent cook, which surprised Lillian until he explained that ranch life required everyone to be self-sufficient. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the stilted formality of the dinner parties Lillian had endured in her old life. She found herself laughing at Thomas's stories about Vincent as a boy, and even Vincent joined in, taking the gentle ribbing with good humor. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas and Mrs. Henderson remained on the porch while Vincent walked Lillian out toward the edge of the property where the land rose slightly, offering a view across the entire valley. The desert stretched out before them, beautiful in its harsh simplicity. "This is what I love," Vincent said quietly. "The space, the silence, the realness of it all. Every day presents new challenges, but they are honest challenges whether animals land. There are no games here, no pretense. You succeed or fail based on your own efforts." "That is what I am trying to learn," Lillian said. "How to measure my worth by my own efforts rather than by what others think of me." "You are already succeeding. The woman I met 2 weeks ago would never have survived what you have done. You have changed, Lillian. You are becoming who you were always meant to be." She looked at him, this cowboy who had shown her more kindness and understanding than anyone in her previous life. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Terrified that I will fail, that I will prove everyone right who said I was too soft, too privileged, too sheltered. But I am also more alive than I have ever been." "Fear and excitement feel the same," Vincent said. "The only difference is what you choose to do with that feeling. You can let it paralyze you or you can let it push you forward." "What do you choose?" Lillian asked. "Forward, always forward." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her pulse race. "Lillian, I know you came here to find yourself, and I respect that. But I need you to know that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach. You are the bravest, most determined person I have ever met, and you are beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with fancy dresses or social graces. You are beautiful because you are real." Lillian's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Vincent, I cannot offer you anything. I have nothing, no money, no prospects, no future beyond what I can build with my own hands. That is all I want," he said simply. "I don't care about your past or what you left behind. I care about who you are now and who you want to become. I am not asking you to give up your independence. I am asking if I can be part of your new life as you figure it out." She wanted to say yes, wanted to step into his arms and let herself feel the connection that had been building between them. But fear held her back, fear of losing herself again, fear of becoming dependent, fear of making another mistake that would cost her the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to know that I can stand on my own before I let myself lean on anyone else." Vincent nodded, though she could see disappointment in his eyes. "I understand, and I will wait for as long as it takes. But know that my offer stands, Lillian. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." They returned to the house shortly after, and the ride back to Florence was quieter than the morning journey had been. But it was not an uncomfortable silence, rather. It felt like the space between words where understanding lived. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Lillian continued working at the hotel, growing more skilled and confident in her abilities. Mrs. Henderson increased her wages and gave her more responsibilities, trusting her to manage the daily operations. Lillian discovered she had a talent for organization and problem-solving, skills her expensive education had given her, but which she had never been allowed to apply. Vincent visited often, and they fell into an easy friendship that was complicated by the undercurrent of attraction neither could fully suppress. He continued teaching her to ride, and soon Lillian was comfortable enough to accompany him on short trips around the countryside. She learned about cattle ranching, about reading the weather and the land, about the careful balance required to survive in the desert. She also learned about Vincent. He told her about his mother, who had died of fever when he was 19, and how it had devastated his father. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, his hope to expand the herd and improve the breeding stock. He shared his love of this wild, unforgiving land with an eloquence that surprised her, making her see beauty in things she had initially found harsh and uninviting. In turn, Lillian told him about her life in Santa Fe, about the suffocating expectations and the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw her as a reflection of her family name. She spoke of her grandmother, the only person who had ever encouraged her to think for herself, and how her death had been the catalyst for Lillian's eventual escape. Vincent listened without judgment, understanding that she was not rejecting her entire past, but only the parts that had denied her agency. November arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the desert briefly green. Lillian had been in Florence for nearly 2 months, and she realized with surprise that she was happy. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her privileged life had never been. She was earning her own money, making her own decisions, building something real through her own efforts. She had also, despite her best intentions, fallen in love with Vincent Ford. It happened gradually, so slowly that she did not realize it until the feeling was already deeply rooted. It was in the way her heart lifted when she saw him walk into the hotel dining room. It was in the warmth that spread through her when he smiled at her across the room. It was in the ache she felt when they said good night and went their separate ways. But most of all, it was in the absolute certainty that he truly saw her, and loved what he saw. The realization terrified her. Loving Vincent meant making herself vulnerable, risking the independence she had worked so hard to establish. But it also meant allowing herself to be fully known, to share her life with someone who respected her strength, rather than trying to diminish it. It was Mrs. Henderson who finally pushed her to acknowledge what everyone else could already see. They were in the hotel kitchen one evening, preparing dinner, when the older woman set down her knife and turned to Lillian with a direct look. "How long are you going to keep that boy waiting?" she asked. Lillian froze in the middle of peeling potatoes. "I do not know what you mean." "Don't play coy with me, girl. Vincent Ford is head over heels for you, and unless I am completely blind, you feel the same way. So what is holding you back?" "I came here to be independent," Lillian said quietly. "I cannot go directly from being my father's property to being some man's wife." Who said anything about being property? Mrs. Henderson's tone was sharp. Vincent doesn't want to own you, Lillian. He wants to build a life with you. There is a difference. Is there? Marriage gives men legal control over women. Everything I have worked for, everything I have built, it would all become his the moment we said our vows. That is the law, yes. But that is not Vincent. You know him well enough by now to understand that. Mrs. Henderson softened her tone. Lillian, independence does not mean being alone. It means having the freedom to choose how you live and with whom you share your life. You have already proven you can survive on your own. Now the question is, what kind of life do you want to build? The question haunted Lillian over the following days. She had been so focused on escaping what she did not want that she had not allowed herself to imagine what she did want. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. She wanted Vincent. She wanted his steady presence, his gentle humor, his understanding of who she was and who she was becoming. She wanted to wake up beside him and work alongside him and build something meaningful together. She wanted love, real love, not the transactional arrangement her parents had tried to force on her. The decision came to her one evening as she stood on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. She had been in Florence for nearly 3 months, and in that time, she had transformed from a sheltered society girl into a capable, independent woman. She had proven to herself that she could survive, that she was strong enough to face adversity and emerge stronger. She did not need to keep testing herself. She needed to start living. Vincent had not been by the hotel for several days, giving her the space he thought she needed. But Lillian knew where to find him. She changed out of her work dress into riding clothes she had purchased with her wages, pulled her hair back in a simple braid, and walked to the livery stable. The stable master, an older man named Pete who had come to like her over the past months, looked up in surprise when she asked to rent a horse. "Kind of late for a ride, Miss Fairmont. I need to get to the Ford ranch. It is important." Pete studied her for a moment, then grinned. "About time. Take Daisy, she knows the way and she has good night vision. Just follow the track east and you will be there in under an hour." The ride through the desert twilight was magical. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. Above her, stars were beginning to emerge in a sky that deepened from blue to purple to black. Lillian urged Daisy into an easy canter, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the wind in her hair, and she felt absolutely free. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as she approached. Vincent was in one of the corrals, working with a young colt on a lead line. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, surprise and concern crossing his face when he recognized her. "Lillian, what is wrong? Is everything all right?" He secured the colt quickly and came to help her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Nothing is wrong," Lillian said, suddenly breathless. Now that she was here, standing so close to him that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, she did not know how to say what she had come to say. "I needed to see you. You rode out here alone in the dark just to see me." Vincent's expression was bemused but pleased. "That was dangerous, Lillian. You could have gotten lost or hurt. I had to come. I could not wait another day to tell you that I have been a fool." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I thought I needed to prove that I could be completely independent, that I did not need anyone. But I have realized that independence is not about being alone, it is about having the freedom to choose. And I choose you, Vincent. I choose a life with you if you still want that." For a moment, Vincent just stared at her, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then his face broke into a smile so bright and joyous that it took her breath away. "If I still want that, Lillian, I have wanted nothing else since the moment I met you." He pulled her close, And finally, his lips met hers in a kiss that was everything she had imagined and more. It was tender and passionate, careful and fierce, a promise and a beginning all at once. Lillian wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was right. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, not just independence, but the freedom to choose love on her own terms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because society expects it or because it is practical, but because I love you and I want to spend every day of my life building something beautiful with you." "Yes," Lillian whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent kissed her again, then laughed and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, his expression grew more serious. "I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. This life is not easy, Lillian. The work is hard, money is often tight, and there are no guarantees. Some years the rain does not come, or the cattle get sick, or the market prices drop. It is not the life you were raised for." "That is exactly why I want it," Lillian said firmly. "I want a life that is real, with challenges that are honest and rewards that are earned. I want to work beside you to share the hardships and the triumphs. I want to build something meaningful, not just exist in a gilded cage. Then we will build it together," Vincent promised. "Equal partners, Lillian. Your opinions matter, your dreams matter. This will be our life, not just mine with you along for the ride." They talked long into the night, sitting on the porch of the ranch house with Thomas Ford, who was delighted by the news of their engagement. They discussed practical matters: where they would live, how to combine their resources, what role Lillian would play in the ranch operations. Vincent made it clear that he wanted her input in all decisions, that he saw her as a full partner in every sense. It was everything Lillian had hoped for, and nothing like the marriage her parents had planned for her. They were married 3 weeks later in the small Florence church, with Mrs. Henderson standing as Lillian's witness and Thomas Ford standing for his son. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate society wedding her mother had been planning, but it was infinitely more meaningful. When Vincent slipped a simple gold band on her finger and spoke his vows in a voice rough with emotion, Lillian felt tears streaming down her face. She had given up everything to find something real, and she had found it in the most unexpected place in this dusty Arizona town, in the arms of a cowboy who saw her for who she truly was and loved her for it. The wedding celebration was held at the hotel, with the entire town invited. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Lillian wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, another skill she had learned during her months in Florence, and she had never felt more beautiful than when Vincent looked at her with love and pride shining in his eyes. As they danced together in the hotel dining room, surrounded by the friends and community she had found in this unlikely place, Lillian marveled at how much her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a frightened woman running from a life that was slowly suffocating her. Now she was dancing with her husband, surrounded by people who valued her for her work and her character rather than her family connections. "Happy," Vincent murmured against her ear. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Lillian replied truthfully. They spent their first night as a married couple at the ranch, in the room that was now theirs. Vincent was gentle and patient, making sure Lillian felt safe and cherished. When they came together, it was with a sense of rightness that transcended physical pleasure. It was the joining of two people who had chosen each other freely and completely. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Lillian felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was what she had been searching for, not just independence, but the freedom to choose her own path and the courage to follow her heart. Life on the ranch was everything Vincent had warned her about and more. The work was physically demanding, the hours were long, and there were constant challenges to overcome. But Lillian threw herself into it with the same determination she had shown at the hotel. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to help with calving season, to keep the books and manage the household. She discovered she had a talent for breeding horses, developing an eye for quality stock that impressed even the veteran ranchers in the area. Vincent was true to his word about treating her as an equal partner. He sought her opinion on major decisions and supported her ideas even when they were unconventional. When Lillian suggested they start raising sheep in addition to cattle, a notion that was met with skepticism by other ranchers, Vincent listened to her reasoning and agreed to try it. The diversification proved profitable, helping them weather a year when cattle prices dropped significantly. Word eventually reached Lillian's parents about her whereabouts and her marriage. Her father sent a series of letters that progressed from angry demands that she return immediately to eventual grudging acceptance of her choice. Her mother's letters were more hurt than angry, expressing incomprehension that Lillian would give up her advantages for a hard life in the desert. But Lillian felt no regret. She wrote back with honesty about her new life, explaining that she had found happiness and fulfillment in ways they would likely never understand. As the months passed, Lillian's relationship with Vincent deepened. They learned to work together seamlessly, developing the kind of unspoken communication that comes from shared experience and deep mutual respect. They had their arguments. Of course, both were strong-willed and opinionated, but they learned to fight fair and always came back together, stronger than before. Their first anniversary arrived in a blur of ranch work and daily life. Vincent surprised Lillian by taking her on a camping trip to the mountains north of Florence, giving them a rare break from responsibilities. They spent 3 days in the wilderness, fishing in cold streams, sleeping under the stars, and talking for hours about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the horse breeding operation," Lillian said one evening as they sat by the campfire. "I think we could develop a reputation for quality stock, maybe even sell to the cavalry." "I think you are right," Vincent said, stirring the fire with a stick. "Your instincts about horseflesh have been spot on. We should invest more resources in that direction." Lillian smiled at his ready agreement. A year ago, she could not have imagined a man taking her business ideas seriously, much less actively supporting them. "Thank you for believing in me." "I always have." Vincent reached over and took her hand. "You have exceeded every expectation, Lillian. You have made this ranch more successful, made my life infinitely richer. I fall more in love with you every single day." "I love you too," Lillian said, the words coming easily now though they had once terrified her. "Thank you for giving me the space to find myself and the patience to let me come to you in my own time. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life." Vincent pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. When they returned from their anniversary trip, Lillian discovered she was pregnant. The realization brought a complex mix of emotions, joy and excitement, but also fear. She had fought so hard for her independence, had worked to become someone defined by more than her relationships or her biology. The idea of becoming a mother felt like stepping into a role she had rejected, but Vincent's reaction helped ease her concerns. When she told him, his face lit up with wonder and delight, but his first question was, "How do you feel about this?" The fact that he asked, that he cared about her feelings rather than just celebrating the news of an heir, meant everything. "I am scared," Lillian admitted. but also happy. "I want this, Vincent. I want a family with you. I just do not want to lose myself in the process." "You will not," he promised. "You will be a mother, but you will still be Lillian Rancher, businesswoman, horsewoman, my partner in everything. One role does not erase the others." Lillian's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the physical demands of ranch life sometimes challenged her. She refused to be treated as fragile, continuing to work until Vincent and his father finally conspired to convince her to take things easier in her final months. Even then, she kept the books, managed the household, and planned the expansion of the horse breeding program. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1885, with Mrs. Henderson attending as midwife. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when Lillian feared she might not survive. But she drew on the same determination that had brought her through everything else, and finally held her newborn son in her arms as Vincent wept with relief and joy beside her. They named him William Thomas Ford, honoring both their fathers. Billy, as they quickly began calling him, had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. He was healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake the entire house when he wanted feeding. Motherhood brought new challenges and unexpected joys. Lillian discovered reserves of patience she had not known she possessed, along with a fierce protective instinct that sometimes surprised her. But true to Vincent's promise, she did not lose herself in the role. As Billy grew, she continued her work with the horses, often carrying him in a sling as she went about her tasks. She taught him about the animals, the land, the value of hard work. Vincent was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of Billy's care in a way that was unusual for the time. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with the baby during colicky nights, and proudly carried his son around the ranch to show him off. Watching him with Billy, seeing the tenderness and patience he displayed, made Lillian fall even more deeply in love with her husband. The years that followed brought both hardships and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resources, market fluctuations that threatened their finances, and the constant physical demands of ranch life. But there were also moments of pure joy watching Billy take his first steps, celebrating successful cattle drives, seeing their horse breeding program gain regional recognition. Lillian's relationship with her parents slowly improved. They never fully understood her choice, but they came to accept it, especially after Billy was born. Her father visited once, arriving in an expensive carriage that looked absurdly out of place in Florence. He spent 3 days at the ranch, watching Lillian work alongside Vincent, seeing the life they had built. Before he left, he pulled her aside. "I was wrong," he said gruffly. "I thought you were making a terrible mistake, throwing away every advantage I had given you. But I can see now that you are happy in a way you never were in Santa Fe. You have built something real here, something meaningful. I am proud of you, Lillian." Those words, which she had never expected to hear, brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Papa. That means more than you know." Her mother visited the following year and was horrified by the primitive conditions, the lack of servants, the endless work. But she also saw the deep love between Lillian and Vincent, the thriving ranch, the happy grandson who followed his mother everywhere. By the end of her visit, she was resigned if not entirely approving. "You could have had everything," she said on her last evening. "I do have everything," Lillian replied, looking out at the desert sunset, at Vincent teaching Billy to rope a fence post, at the life she had built through her own choices and efforts. "Just not in the way you imagined." When Billy was 3, Lillian became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter, Grace Elizabeth Ford, was born in the spring of 1888. Grace had her mother's dark eyes and a temperament that suggested she would be every bit as strong-willed as Lillian herself. With 2 children, life became even more hectic. But Lillian and Vincent worked as a team, dividing responsibilities and supporting each other through the chaos. They expanded the ranch house, adding rooms for the children and modernizing the kitchen. The horse breeding program flourished, with buyers coming from as far as Texas and California to purchase Ford horses. Lillian had found her calling in the horses. She had an instinctive understanding of bloodlines and temperament, and she began developing a breeding program focused on horses that were intelligent, hardy, and versatile. Vincent handled the cattle side of the operation while Lillian managed the horses, and together they made the ranch increasingly prosperous. As their 10th anniversary approached, Lillian reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She bore little resemblance to the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Florence a decade earlier. That woman had been running from something, desperate but uncertain. The woman Lillian had become was confident, capable, deeply loved and loving in return. She had built a life that mattered, not because of wealth or social position, but because of the relationships she had nurtured and the honest work she had done. Vincent planned a surprise party for their anniversary, inviting friends from throughout the territory. The ranch was filled with laughter and music, with children running wild and adults catching up on news and gossip. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, cornered Lillian on the porch. "Look at you," the older woman said with satisfaction. "A decade ago, you could not boil water or make a bed. Now you are running one of the most successful ranches in Arizona. You should be proud, Lillian." "I had good teachers," Lillian said, squeezing the older woman's hand. "You took a chance on me when you had no reason to believe I would succeed." "I will never forget that. I saw something in you that day," Mrs. Henderson said, "a spark of determination, of courage. You just needed the opportunity to let it grow." She paused, then added, "You and Vincent have built something special here, not just the ranch but the life you share. That is rarer than you might think." As the party continued, Vincent found Lillian and drew her aside. "Dance with me," he said, even though there was no music in that moment. Lillian went into his arms and they swayed together in the moonlight, much as they had on their wedding night a decade earlier. 10 years, she murmured against his chest. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Regrets?" Vincent asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not a single one. You offered me your simple life, and it turned out to be the richest life I could have imagined." She looked up at him, this man who had seen her when she could not see herself, who had loved her through all her doubt and fear and eventual transformation. "I gave up everything I had to find something real, and I found you." "We found each other," Vincent corrected. "And we will keep finding each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." They kissed under the desert stars, surrounded by the life they had built together, and Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had walked away from wealth and privilege, had given up a life of ease to face uncertainty and hard work. But in return, she had gained something infinitely more valuable: the freedom to choose her own path, the satisfaction of building something real through her own efforts, and love that was freely given and joyfully received. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and rewards. Billy grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. Grace proved to be as stubborn and independent as her mother, with a particular talent for breaking horses that showed itself early. Thomas Ford eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, at the age of 78, having lived to see his grandchildren thriving and his ranch expanding beyond anything he had imagined. Lillian became known throughout the territory as one of the best horse breeders in the Southwest. Her reputation brought buyers and respect, and she never tired of the work. She also became involved in efforts to improve education in Florence, using her own education and resources to help establish a proper school for the growing town. When Billy turned 18, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, inspired by years of watching his mother work with horses. Lillian and Vincent supported his dream, even though it meant he would leave for several years of schooling. Grace, at 15, was already talking about expanding the ranch further, about breeding not just horses, but developing new techniques for cattle ranching in the harsh desert environment. "They are going to surpass us," Vincent said one evening as he and Lillian sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint familiar colors across a familiar sky. They were both in their 40s now, weathered by sun and work but still strong, still deeply in love. "I hope they do," Lillian replied. "That is what we built this for, not just for ourselves, but for them and whatever comes after." "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Santa Fe?" Vincent asked. "If you had married that senator's son and lived that other life?" Lillian considered the question seriously, as she always did with Vincent. "Sometimes, but I cannot really imagine it anymore. That woman I was supposed to be feels like someone from a story, not a real person. This is who I am, this life, this place, you and our children. Everything else feels like it happened to someone else." "You saved yourself," Vincent said. "I was just lucky enough to be here when you did." "We saved each other," Lillian corrected. "You showed me what real partnership could look like, what it meant to be truly seen and valued. I could not have become who I am without you." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the desert coming alive with its nocturnal sounds. Inside the house, they could hear Grace practicing piano, a luxury they had been able to afford in recent years. The ranch stretched around them, hundreds of acres that represented years of hard work, smart decisions, and partnership. Lillian thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperate flight from everything she had known, the terror and exhilaration of those early days in Florence, the gradual transformation from helpless society girl to capable ranch woman. She thought about the moment she had looked into Vincent Ford's eyes and seen not judgment or pity, but understanding and respect. She thought about the choice she had made to open her heart, to risk vulnerability, to believe that love and independence were not mutually exclusive. She had given up wealth, social position, comfort, security, and her family's approval. In return, she had gained calloused hands, weathered skin, tired muscles, and the most profound happiness she had ever known. She had learned to cook and clean, to birth calves and break horses, to keep books and negotiate prices. She had learned that her worth was not determined by her family name or her bank account, but by her character, her effort, her choices. Most importantly, she had learned that real love was not about possession or control, but about freedom and choice. Vincent had offered her not just his life, but the space to create her own life within it. He had been patient when she needed patience, supportive when she needed support, and equal always. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, noticing her faraway expression. "That I am the luckiest woman in the world," Lillian said simply. "That I am grateful for every hard day, every challenge, every moment that brought me to you." Vincent took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that marked years of work. "The cowboy offered her his simple life," he said softly, "and somehow she made it extraordinary." "We made it extraordinary," Lillian corrected. "Together." As the years continued, that remained their truth. They faced droughts and floods, market crashes, and personal losses. They celebrated their children's successes and supported them through failures. They grew older together, their love deepening with time and shared experience. Billy returned from veterinary school and set up practice in Florence, becoming the town's first qualified veterinarian. He married a teacher named Sarah, and they gave Lillian and Vincent 3 grandchildren who spent summers at the ranch, learning the same lessons their father had learned. Grace never married, choosing instead to focus entirely on the ranch. She took over operations as Lillian and Vincent grew older, implementing innovations that pushed the Ford ranch to new levels of success. She became one of the first women in Arizona to independently own and operate a major cattle and horse ranch. And she never forgot the example her mother had set that a woman could be anything she chose to be. On their 25th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Grandchildren ran wild through the house while Billy and Grace argued good-naturedly about ranch management. Sarah helped in the kitchen, and friends from Florence and beyond filled the house with laughter and stories. Lillian stood on the porch, surveying the scene, and felt Vincent's arms wrap around her from behind. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Always," she replied, leaning back against him. "From the moment I chose you, I have been happy. No regrets about the life you left behind." "That was not a life," Lillian said firmly. "It was an existence. This is a life messy and hard and beautiful and real. This is everything I was searching for when I stepped off that stagecoach." "I love you, Lillian Ford," Vincent said, "today and every day for the rest of our lives." "And I love you," Lillian replied. "My cowboy, my partner, my home." They stood together as the sun set over the desert they both loved, over the life they had built through choice and courage and unwavering commitment. Lillian had given up everything to find something real, and in Vincent's simple life, she had found not just love but herself. She had discovered that true richness had nothing to do with money or social position, and everything to do with authentic connection, purposeful work, and the freedom to choose one's own path. The Ford Ranch continued to thrive long after Lillian and Vincent were gone, a testament to what they had built together. But their true legacy was not measured in acres or profits. It was measured in the children and grandchildren who learned from their example that courage means choosing your own path, that love means seeing and being seen, and that a simple life, lived with integrity and passion, is the richest life of all. Lillian Fairmont had arrived in Florence, Arizona, as a frightened runaway, dressed in silk and carrying nothing but desperate hope. She lived the rest of her days as Lillian Ford, rancher and horse breeder, wife and mother, wearing denim and leather and carrying the satisfaction of a life well lived. She had given up everything rich to find something real, and the cowboy who offered her his simple life had given her the world. In the end, that was the story she would have wanted told, not of sacrifice or loss, but of discovery and gain. She had not given up anything, not really. She had simply exchanged false riches for true wealth, and in doing so had found everything that mattered. Love, freedom, purpose, partnership, these were the treasures that filled her days and her heart until her very last breath, surrounded by the family she had built and the man who had loved her for exactly who she was. And if you had asked her, in those final days, whether she would do it all again, leave behind wealth and privilege for uncertainty and hard work, she would have answered without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because the best choice she ever made was the choice to find out who she could become, and the best gift she ever received was a cowboy's simple life, which turned out to be anything but simple, and everything she had ever dreamed of.